All right. Go live. So my name is Chris Berry, certified law attorney, certified financial planner with Castle Wealth Group. We do legal, financial, and tax planning all under one roof. And we do these weekly wisdom webinars where we just answer questions that have been submitted during the week or that people have as they log on. So um, and I always like to start with a positive focus, just something positive that's happened over the last week or so. And for me, this past week, it was my parents' 48th birthday. So we just had them over for a nice dinner, and it's kind of fun. We looked at some old movies and stuff from when I was a kid, as well as when my parents were kids. So it was cool. So happy 48th anniversary to my parents. And then with that, we'll go ahead and get started. If you do have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and try to address it. But first, we'll start with something that was submitted ahead of time. So let me just share my screen real quick. All right. So the question is, should I pay off my mortgage before retiring? Can you explain what a tax deductible interest is? So I'll start with the second question first. Your mortgage is tax deductible. They've made some changes with that under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in terms of limiting how much of it is deductible. So the mortgage interest is deductible. It used to be more of a tax savings prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and how they changed standard deduction and everything, basically doubling it. But there is a potential tax deduction. That's more of our CPA kind of handles that side of things. But then this is a question I get all the time is, should I pay off the mortgage? And kind of without knowing the details, everyone's situation is a little bit different, but there's a general rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is if the interest rate, so you look at the interest rate. If the interest rate is less than roughly 4%, then typically you would want to keep that mortgage. If the interest rate is greater than 4%, you might want to pay off the mortgage. And there's a numbers and psychology aspect to this. And the numbers might say one thing, the psychology might say something else, and you just have to figure out where you fall. And interesting enough, like my undergrad before I went to law school was actually in psychology and finance. So I understand both sides of the coin. Because from a psychology standpoint, like we brought up on the American dream and being debt-free, paying off the mortgage sounds great. But sometimes the numbers would say otherwise. Because think of it like a bucket. So if you have water in this bucket and there's a hole in the bucket, and I met with some clients today. They had a mortgage of $80,000 and the interest rate was 2.75%. So they had this mortgage from a while ago. So there's a hole in the bucket where 2.75 is dripping out a year, right? But if you look at where interest rates are, like, or what you can do in terms of investments, if it's greater than that 2.75 or kind of the general rule 4%, then it wouldn't make sense to put a hole to fill the hole because you're getting more money pouring in. Because if you use that cash to plug the hole, okay, granted, you plugged a or in this situation, it was a 2.75% hole going out, but you're sacrificing money that could be making 4.5%. Like we have high yield savings accounts as of today. Granted, the Fed's just cut the rates recently. They were at 5%, but now it's at 4.5%. So if we can get a guaranteed 4.5% going in and only 2.5% going out, the water in the bucket's growing by 2%. So the general rule would be looking at the interest rates and just making a decision based on that. So that would be what the numbers say. But again, like if it's keeping you up at night, if you'll create more peace of mind and it's not going to put a hole in the whole retirement plan by paying off the mortgage and it makes you feel better, like what is the purpose of money? The purpose of money is to live and enjoy yourself, right? So if it's stressing you out having that mortgage, then I would explore paying off that mortgage. Now, I had another client who she was looking at getting her windows done or some painting and stuff like that. And she wanted to know, should we pull the money from the investments or take out a home equity loan? And so my question was, well, how much is the interest rate? Well, the home equity loan was like 7.5%. So I was like, you know what? That's pretty high. Don't take out that loan. Let's pull money from the investments and cover that. So I always first look to just where the interest rates are for the debt. Like I think when I got my minivan back in 2015, which still holding strong, I think the interest rate was like 0.09% or something. So it's basically free money. So I always look at interest rates, general rule of less than 4, don't pay it off, greater than 4, pay it off. Okay. All right. Now, another question I had submitted. And again, if you do have any other questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A. So I just had one come in a minute ago. And let me copy it. And I will paste it. All right. Let me share my screen real quick. And sharing. And sharing now. A married couple has a legacy joint trust. What happens when the first spouse dies? Does the joint trust need to be modified to a single trust, or does it remain valid? So, situation here, we have a married couple and they have what we call a legacy trust, which is a type of trust that says if one spouse, typically it says if one spouse passes away, then everything goes to the survivor. And then if both spouses passes, instead of it going outright to the kids, where now it could be lost due to divorce, lawsuits, creditor action, bankruptcy, instead it's held in trust for their benefit, where they could be the trustees of their own separate share trust. So with that legacy provision, what we're doing is we're building in language to say, let's say you have 3 kids, each kid would inherit their share separately, and whatever they keep in trust is now protected from divorces, creditors, bankruptcies, and then if they pass away, the money stays in the bloodline. But really the question is getting to, okay, we have a married couple. If one spouse passes away, what happens with that joint trust? Typically, the way that we structure it is that, think of it like a suitcase that both spouses are holding on to. If one spouse passes away, the survivor is still holding on to the suitcase. So really, typically, unless it's like a second marriage or some other circumstances, when we have a married couple and we're setting up a joint trust, really there's nothing that has to be done from a trust standpoint when one spouse passes away. The big thing I always say at that point is it's really important to make sure the trust is funded properly, because that's where when the surviving spouse passes away, sometimes we see things end up in probate if it's not titled properly in the trust. And that's one of the things that we review with our clients on an annual basis when they're part of our client care program is we make sure, hey, have you opened up any new accounts? Did you buy any new pieces of real estate? Just to make sure everything is titled properly in the trust. But to answer the question, with the joint trust, the way that we structure it typically is that if one spouse passes away, nothing really has to happen from a legal standpoint. But I would always say, give our office a call, any big life changes like losing a spouse, just to make sure that everything's taken care of moving forward. Okay. All right. And then this question just came in. And this question, what did I just do? Hold on. Let me share my screen real quick. So question, I-bond rate updates. So I-bonds. So I-bonds a couple of years ago were like the hottest commodity because I-bonds were guaranteed for at least a period of about 6 months, like a 9.2% rate of return for 6 months. Now there's limitations. You could only put in 10,000 or 15,000 depending on the situation. If you're a married couple, you could double that. If you had a trust, you could actually triple that depending on your situation and whether you had like a tax return worth money coming back. But they're the hottest thing in the world. Like everyone was talking about I-bonds, but they're based on inflation. And so the government has said inflation has went down since that about a year or 2 ago. Maybe it's 2 years ago. Because I remember it went from about 9 to about 7 and change, and then 6, and then right now it's at 4.28% or 4.2 something percent. So, and typically I-bonds are built on this 5-year chassis, where if you have to keep it at least a year, but once you keep it a year, you can cash it out at any time. You're just going to lose 3 months worth of interest, which really isn't that big of a deal. So for a lot of people who bought those I-bonds previously, we're actually recommending cashing them out generally, just because the interest rates have dropped so much. Granted, inflation hasn't dropped. Like my hamburgers still cost double what they used to, but the government has said inflation has dropped. So those I-bonds have been basically cut in half. And if you look historically, I-bonds are really about 1-2% rate of return, like historically. So for those people that bought the I bonds when they're really high, a couple reasons. One, like right now we have high yield savings accounts that are at 4.5% that are completely liquid. So you can find better and safe investments than I bonds right now. The other reason I'm not a big fan of the I bonds, like moving forward, is that it's just like one other thing that we have to deal with. One other thing that if you were to pass away, the kids have to reach out to treasury.gov. And I'm all for simplifying unless there's a reason to make things more complex. So I think I bonds at the time were everyone should have been picking up I bonds initially when they're at that 9% or 7% even. But at this point, when I'm sitting down with clients and we're having our reviews, if they have I bonds, I recommend they cash them out. Financial. Okay. So here's a follow-up question to that joint trust question. So let me kind of paste this and share my screen. All right. So follow-up to that joint trust. So it appears the trust is still valid. Is there then need to inform the financial institutions that hold the accounts registered in joint name that one of the trustees died? Yeah. So there is going to be some follow-up with the financial institutions because with that joint trust, the trust might not be the owner of all the stuff. For example, we have a married couple, one spouse dies and they have pre-tax accounts like IRAs, 401ks. That's not owned by the trust. That's owned by the individual. And ideally, the spouse or trust is listed as a beneficiary. So you have to reach out to the different financial accounts and then transfer it from one spouse to the other spouse. Now you're using that spouse's social security number. Do they have to be notified about a change that one of the trustees is no longer alive? They wouldn't have to be notified. When they would have to be notified is that if there's a new trustee stepping in. So now if both spouses pass away, now there's a successor trustee, then we'd have to do a certificate of trust that says successor trustee 1 is now the acting trustee, and we have to get that to the financial institution so they know who to work with. But yeah, you have to follow up with the financial institutions to make sure everything is either in the surviving spouse's name or pointing to the trust. But in terms of the legal work, really, there's no legal work that needs to be done when one spouse passes away, typically with a joint trust. So, all right, that is all I got. If you have anything else, feel free to email it over and